How often do you hear the phrase gun violence? It's practically a mantra now, right? The term is thrown around so often that you might not even think about it anymore. And that's exactly, by the way, what the anti-gun lobby wants. You see, in reality, so-called gun violence is a meaningless phrase. When we come back, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why the so-called gun violence is nothing more than a propaganda term, plain and simple. Hey folks, I'm Mark. Welcome to the Four Boxes Diner. You've got to give the anti-gunners credit. They're propaganda masters. They've come up with a bunch of political terms that are blatantly skewed in their favor, yet those terms still dominate the mainstream discourse. Think about some of the phrases they've come up with. Phrases like assault weapons and ghost guns. Now we're going to tackle both of these terms in other videos, but for now let's look at the granddaddy of them all. That's gun violence. Over the last several decades, the phrase gun violence has taken off. The anti-gunners would say that we've been seeing an epidemic of gun violence, right? But there's only one problem, of course. That's the murder rate in this country was actually much higher, both 30 and 50 years ago, than it is today. That's really the first clue we all have that we're dealing with propaganda and not simple facts. Why is it that when it comes to guns, liberal politicians, liberal pundits, and protesters blame the instrument of murder, not the murderer? Have guns magically sprung to life like the cursed kitchenware in Disney's Beauty and the Beast? Is there something special about guns that increases crimes? No, I don't think so. The truth is there's no such thing as gun violence. What you hear called gun violence is really just violence or criminal violence. You see, violence has been an unfortunate part of the human condition from the very beginning of time. Humans did not need firearms to be violent. Just ask Cain and Abel, or watch an episode of Game of Thrones. The United States leads the world in gun ownership by a wide margin. So, if you go by the gun violence mantra, you'd expect our country to lead the world in violence statistics as well, right? But we don't, not even close. In fact, according to the World Economic Forum, the United States is not even in the top 80 most violent nations. Somehow, the rate of violence in the United States is about the same as that of other Western industrialized nations that are essentially gun-free. Now, how can this be? Well, that leads us to the second reason why gun violence is a meaningless propaganda term. In the real world, people commit violence in all sorts of ways. Yeah, they use guns, of course, but they also use plenty of other types of weapons as well. How do we know this? Well, just take a look at the FBI crime statistics. Bear in mind that the FBI keeps statistics on the instruments used to commit homicides every year. They track those killed every year by knives, by clubs, hammers, blunt objects, fists, and feet, and the like. And in 2019, for example, there were actually way more murders committed with knives than with rifles or shotguns. Let's look at charming old England. The United Kingdom is home to some of the world's toughest gun restrictions, including a ban on handguns. So what's happened over there? Has it become completely safe with no violence where everyone gets to sleep soundly at night? I don't think so. Knife fiends have soared, for example. Knife-related homicides in England and Wales jumped 53% between 2015 and 2018. In early 2018, London's murder rate actually surpassed, believe it or not, New York City's for the same time period. Then, in October of 2021, England made international headlines when a member of parliament was stabbed to death in a church. The violence is so bad over there that some people in England have, earnestly so, started an organization called Lives Over Knives to try to improve the communities in that country. But when you misdiagnose a problem, you waste critical resources, in my view, and you waste critical time and effort trying to solve something that's not the essential or real problem. And that's the issue when you're blaming the instruments of violence instead of the people that actually perpetrate the violence. Relatedly, that is the real issue when you're blaming things like guns or knives, or trucks, or any of these other inanimate objects. You see, you end up ignoring the bigger issues like who's actually committing the violence, and how do we stop them from doing so? Now, we know from the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, we know from the Happy Land Social Club arson killing in 1990, and the crazy German pilot who crashed his plane with 43 people on board in 1987, that murderers and psychopaths do not need guns to endanger society. Let's not forget about the person who drove a cargo truck into a crowd in France in 2016, killing 86 people. Or in 2017, when a man rented a truck and plowed down pedestrians in Manhattan in New York City, killing 8 people. Or in 2018, when a man driving a van did the same in Toronto, killing 10. Maybe it's simply time to start a campaign to end van violence, right? No, that would be dumb. That would be a waste of time. And we shouldn't do it. So why is gun violence any different? Tell me if you've heard this one before. Every day in the United States, 106 people die from gun violence in this country. Well, this is a favorite talking point of the gun grabbers. I mean, you see it plastered on their websites, you see it repeated in the news and on interviews, and the language sure as heck sounds like 106 Americans are murdered every day by people using handguns or guns to commit those, violent acts. Except it's not even close to being true. You see, 60%, that's 60% of the people who die from gunshots each day here die because they chose to commit suicide. Now, that's a tragic figure, and every suicide is in fact a tragedy. But it makes no sense to attribute it to gun violence or so-called gun violence. There is no evidence to show that restricting people's access to guns somehow lowers the suicide rate. There are plenty of countries with strict gun control laws that have much higher suicide rates than the United States. Now, when someone commits suicide by an overdose, we don't say that, hey, that guy was killed by pills, and we don't start protesting in front of local pharmacies, do we? So why are we blaming guns for suicides? And now let's break it down even more. If you look at the 39 people each day who are killed by another person using a gun, right? Set the suicides aside for the moment, and look at the other 39 people in that 106 person a day killed by so-called gun violence statistic. Now again, when you look at these 39 people each day that are killed by another person using a gun, again, that is a lot of lives, and we wish it were smaller. Of course we do. We wish it were 0. But we got to put this number into context. You see, every day 104 people die in motor vehicle accidents here in the United States. That's nearly 3 times the number of people who are murdered by someone using a firearm. I guess it's time to ban cars and trucks? Yeah, I don't think so either. I think that would be absurd. So let's wrap up. The next time you hear someone condemning so-called gun violence, you'll recognize it for what it is. That's a term that the anti-gun lobby invented to try to take away Americans' right to keep and bear arms. Remember these 3 reasons why so-called gun violence is a propaganda term and nothing more. First, the phrase gun violence doesn't mean anything. Guns are inanimate objects with no will of their own. It's people who commit violence using various instruments, including but not limited to guns. There is no such thing as quote-unquote gun violence, just criminal violence or simply violence. Number 2, all kinds of things are used as weapons in violent crimes, but you don't hear American leaders calling for an end of the epidemic of knife violence or truck violence or van violence here in the United States. Number 3, the anti-gun crowd has to mislead and distort data, especially by blurring the lines between suicides and homicides every day in this country. And the way they do this is they skew the data to make the case for so-called gun violence being a quote-unquote gun violence epidemic. So hopefully you learned something, and again, thanks for joining me here at the 4 Boxes Diner, where we serve fresh, hot Second Amendment news and analysis. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and help spread the word. And again, we'll see you next time soon at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.